Okay, I'd kind of like to kick it off with a bit of a possibly hard, possibly easy one.
All right.
I'd like to ask each of you to tell us concisely and clearly what exactly the job you're running for, what the job description is.
Okay, can we start? So I'm running for VP Education. Basically, the VP Education is responsible for anything in the classroom, whether that's professors, course evaluations, anything like that. They're responsible for advocating to both the municipal government, provincial government, federal government, as well as the university on all things academic.
So the VP Operation and Finance oversees all of the operations of the Federation of Students. So that includes all of the commercial services, all of the different support areas, so IT, marketing, and finance. They also oversee more of the strategy of the organization, the budget, and the communications side. So kind of the fill-in-the-gap style of the rest of the pieces to the organization.
So the VP Internal is responsible for overseeing all of campus life. So this includes things like the services and clubs that FEDS runs, but also things like working with societies, and also in general just advocating for things like in addition to the VP Education when there's something that falls under my portfolio that's not under the VP Eds.
And President is kind of a really weird mixture of kind of university governance and relations and stuff like that. Orientation week as a very odd outlier, and kind of just filling in the gaps. So governance of the corporation, university, lobbying, orientation, and then whatever doesn't get covered by those three people, I get to have the pleasure of working on.
We'll just kind of go until we have something else to say.
Yeah, okay, so I'm going to ask a question about mental health. It's been a big part of the entire election period, but it's also a standout part of your platform. So mental health is a big part of your platform, and you've mentioned the need to add more counselors on campus during both of the debates, I believe. So how do you plan to do that, considering as FEDS is not in charge of counseling services?
So I'll talk about that because I'm the one who's been really strong in pushing for mental health. So that goes back to what I said about how the VP Internal portfolio also has some advocacy components to it. So that includes like working with the faculties to see like where we can fill in some of their needs. And I think a really big need is additional resources in counseling. So when I'm looking at things like student life, we want to see like obviously we want to support clubs and services, but we also want to look at like why students are stressed or how they're stressed and how we can improve that. So part of what I plan to do is like do things like work with a mental health committee to make sure that this is something we're really strongly pushing for. When we hire counselors, FEDS, in the past, FEDS has worked with the university to hire additional counselors. So when Andrew Noble was president, they did increase the FEDS fee a little bit to add additional counselors. What I want to look at is seeing if the faculty can cover part of that fee. So again, going back to advocacy so that we hire additional counselors, but without as much cost to students as there has been before.
Okay, I've got a couple questions from that. Just you said that they increased the FEDS fee.
FEDS administered fee.
Oh, okay.
So not the FEDS fee, the FEDS administered fee, which is seen by the student, I forget what it stands for, SAC.
Yes.
Look it up.
So basically it's
Yeah.
athletics, your UPass, your health plan, and a whole bunch of other little fees that it falls under FEDS
So it's-
fees, but it's not truly just FEDS.
It's universities, it's the student services administered fees
Yes.
that FEDS jointly oversees with the university, and all counseling resources, standard, except for the ones that Angela was talking about with like working with the department, would be approved through that committee. So I mean, we could use that to get more counselors by increasing that fee, or we can work with the faculties to try and get them to cover what would normally be the student half.
Okay, and so you mentioned faculty before, and by that you actually meant the faculties.
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Because that would be very different.
Yeah.
So that's already happening in engineering. There's
Yeah.
there's counselors that are department or faculty specific in engineering, where the student half of the counselor is paid for by the engineering faculty, and then the other half is paid by the central administration. Because the central administration is really gung-ho to put more counselors onto this campus. It's just the other side of the fee needs to be filled somewhere.
To add on that, I remember, Liz, you said that during the other debate hosted by FEDS that you really want to expand the
health plan to include mental health support. What would this entail in terms of services, and how will it figure into cost?
So that's something we could definitely look at. Right now, the Fed's health and dental plan doesn't cover any mental health resources. It does cover dietitians, massage therapy, physiotherapy, and chiropractors, but no mental health and wellness. So that's something we could look at discussing with our plan provider to increase that. Right now, we have a lot of money saved up in the health and dental administration that we haven't paid out. So depending on the negotiations, that may actually come at no cost to students, providing that extra service depending on the level of service.
Yeah, and just to add to that, so the way that counseling works in the university is that is free to all students. Like, sometimes there's a little bit of gray lines, like depending on if it's like faculty counseling. But if you go to counseling outside, like you can get community counseling, like through KW Counseling Services, and there's like some religious groups that offer it as well. And that's really expensive, and that's not covered anywhere. So that's something that Liz would like to look into.
I have more of a lighthearted question.
Because that got deep.
What is your stance on bringing Starbucks to campus?
I love Starbucks. I mean, I know so when it was discussed last time, there was like ethical concerns about how Starbucks does certain purchasing and stuff like that. And they were very close, and it's actually kind of unfortunate. It was just a poor timing situation. So accounting and finance really wanted a Starbucks, but they were trying to put the Starbucks in the Environment 3 building, and the Environment 3 dean was the one who stopped it from being a Starbucks during the progress. And I know a lot of students that were working to work with Starbucks to bring a lot of neat initiatives into that particular Starbucks that they were really keen on. And it was other groups, and I don't know enough of the details, but the dean stopped it. And then because that had already started on Starbucks, when they started plans for the accounting expansion, they were expecting there to be a Starbucks in Environment 3 initially. So they started with food services, and then when the Starbucks deal fell through with Environment 3, they had already made progress on the food services front for accounting. So if it had actually just gone the other way, we'd probably already have a Starbucks in accounting right now. I mean, it might have failed as well. It's hard to say, but it almost happened. Bad turn of events. But yes, a lot of people like Starbucks, and I mean, Laurier has one, and it seems to be extremely popular.
It's good for variety for students. Williams is great. We have a lot of Tim Hortons already, being able to kind of provide a different service for students.
Yeah. If students want it, then I'm all for it.
Yeah.
And the closest Starbucks is on King, so it would be nice to have one that's significantly closer.
Yeah.
Good points.
Okay. One of the major points in your platform is a readily available and early budget. How will you make this budget easy to review, as your platform claims?
That's my expertise, I guess.
Look at her smile. She's so excited.
Yay, budget! So basically, currently under the existing procedure, the budget is supposed to be finished a lot earlier than it is. So what we're talking about is really following the procedure in some ways, and starting to, the budget committee is reviewing the procedure and is making changes. So a lot of those will help speed up the process. What we're looking at is getting the exec budget in a draft within the first month of office. That's most of the budget is pretty standard. The commercial services side is done through board, and that one's fairly consistent year to year. The services are a little bit more challenging, but the exec budget is where all that discretionary money goes. So each special project, there's a lot of money in that account, and it's something that we really need to start thinking early about what the exec priorities are rather than later. So we know how much we're spending, we know how much extra is available for different purposes like the services. So how to do that would be really starting the budget earlier, getting the budget committee ready earlier, and really starting to show students, this is what we have so far. It's not done yet, but what do you think? Because oftentimes we wait until the budget's completely done to even send it out to council. So council spends a lot of time making those arguments that could have been done a lot earlier. So that's how we want to speed up the budget process.
As for the display thing, I think right now our budget is very much an accounting budget, and that's what we release to the general public, is what is our internal accounting budget that speaks to a lot of things that people don't care about, like
There's appreciation of
and all of that. So it's just, when we're talking about our exec budget, like we can strive towards keeping that account style, but I think what's more valuable is getting those, what's changed from the previous years, where are we throwing lots of money, and kind of doing, like, it can be simple as, like, I know a student union this past year did a really neat infographic for their entire budget that was like, here's how much of each of your $50 fee is going to each thing, and like did little like pie charts and stuff like that. And I mean, maybe we don't go quite that fancy for the 1 month budget, but like it doesn't need to be a full accounting budget when you're just trying to get people's feedback on what your spending priorities are. So we could just talk about like, we're going to increase spending to this area that we hadn't spent before, or we're introducing this new project with this much money, and kind of sticking to what's new and what's changed as what gets displayed or more emphasis, and kind of moving away from displaying just a plain accounting budget, because most students aren't as interested in that.
The other big thing our team is really looking at is the idea of priorities that that look free. So a lot of the big projects, even especially these past couple years, have been projects that don't take any cash resources, but they take a lot of time. And we want to make sure that we're showing those to students as well, so students have a good picture of, this is what my executive are going to be doing. Some of these projects are extremely expensive but take very little time. Some of these projects only take time and they don't take a lot of resources. A good example of this is Devin's service review. No cost to students, but it took a lot of his time. And being able to show students that, yes, all of our exec are working towards big projects, and just showing, these are the big projects, here's what they're going to cost, and showing the full picture instead of just the cost picture.
Well, I guess continuing along those lines, you guys have mentioned introducing new opportunities and paid positions. So new student positions and paid opportunities would mean a higher cost. How do you guys intend on paying for that?
So one of the really cool things that the university does is the work study program. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. And what it allows is for someone like Feds pay, I think it's around $200, and they get a student a term. And they get 100 hours of a student, and the rest is financed through the university and the government. So this is a great way to get students in, and they're working. They're getting great experiences, so they can do research. They can go to meetings, and they're learning a lot. And it's a very low cost way for us to do it as well. So it's this trade off that they're getting great training, they're learning, and we're getting their skills as well. The other thing too is that we do want to grow part-time workers as well, but we also want to do a focus on volunteers. There's a lot of great students out there that don't necessarily want to work 20 hours a week. They maybe want to work 5 to 10. So we want to give them the skills they need to be successful, and let them pick the projects they want and support them. And that's one of the things that we're really pushing, is that we recognize that the four of us can't do everything. And there's some really passionate students on this campus, so let's give them the skills, let's support them, and let them do their projects. Because if we have volunteers that really want to be here and really want to do their work, we'll get so much more done than the four of us working by ourselves.
And then, sorry, Greg.
I was just wondering, is that not something Feds does now, or they don't turn away volunteers?
Well, yeah, like, so let me speak to that a little bit. Like, when so these guys have been a lot more involved in Feds than I have, and that's not for lack of trying. Like, when I tried getting involved in Feds, like, in first or second year, I was just really confused about how to actually get started. Like, I know there's things like council, but I was like, I remember going on the Feds website, and I was like, okay, like, there's a lot of part-time positions, and that's not really what I want to do, but I just want to, like, get involved in the organization. And one of the things we really want to do is like create like a volunteer ladder. So if someone wants to start off in like a low tier position, we want to make sure they know how to like progress as a volunteer, so that they'll get more opportunities and more experience in their involvement.
Yeah.
Sorry. Go
Oh
ahead.
no, it's like it's a really good example of where this is done well is orientation in a lot of the faculties. Yeah. It's very clear, like the notion of like you do a frontline leader and you can move to a head leader to a planning level and up. Like there's that very clear progression. And Feds doesn't necessarily have a clear progression in like where to go. So like the only one that is commonly known is like this idea of council and then maybe board. But that's a very small subsection of what you can do in the organization.
And even within like, especially the VP Ed department, there's a lot of students that are interested in helping. And I think some of it is just making sure that students know that they're empowered, and that when they go and make a decision that we're going to trust them to do it, and kind of give them that yes, this is what you want to do, great, how do I help you, and go and make these decisions and get the work done yourself instead of always having to report back. I think that's extremely important. That it's something that I think that this university forgets sometimes, that failure is okay, and actually it's a way to learn. And I'm a strong believer in that, and that's why we're okay with letting students try things and do the work themselves, because it's a learning experience as much as anything else.
I have a couple questions stemming from this. First of all, just adding on more volunteers, more employees, even through the work study program, and even just some part-time, I presume, paid through Feds. Providing all of them with space to work in and materials. with which to do any work will cost feds money. Where is that going to come from?
Yes, it is going to cost a bit of resources. Space is one of those resources not every volunteer and not every part-time employee really needs an office, and that's something we need to start looking at, and looking strategically at whether does this employee need an office? They're a student, they're only going to be there 5 to 10 hours a week. Probably not. We need to make sure that we're picking that strategically. Most of the resources is really just that time and that support and that mentorship. So it's not actually as expensive as, not every employee, again, needs a computer. Most students have laptops. Most students are willing to work on their own laptop and are probably actually more comfortable on it. And being able to kind of work on that, they don't need to be in the Fed's office to be doing their work. They can be wherever they need to be on campus, meeting with students, and really making that less of the Fed's offices. I'm a Fed's employee. I'm sitting right in that office. As a student, being able to kind of go and interact with students while you're doing your work. So that's a big part of the role. The other thing is a lot of it will just be that volunteer aspect. And it isn't extremely expensive. There is definitely room in the budget. Last year, there were a lot of one-time projects that were really high cost that won't be continuing to be paid for this year. So that does free up some of that space.
And I mean, like, further with the budget, like, that's why, like, some of the ideas exist in there. Like, so, like, the sponsorship idea, like, that should help free up funds that we can use for other projects and other initiatives within Feds, right? So, depending on that level of success, because some of, like, the bigger events happen earlier on in the year, that'll indicate how many paid positions we can introduce, right? So it's one of those, like, we'll scale as we see resources free up, and the one-time projects also ends up freeing up what made this year's budget really difficult was those really expensive one-off projects that had to be done this year, right? So, like, the long-range plan, in particular, is a very expensive, like, consultation project. So that's had to be done this year because of the other one expired after 3 years. The governance review became a priority early on in this year, so that was one that was introduced. There's also that's another large budget expense. And so you take both of those out and you have, like, $50,000 in the budget all of a sudden, which is quite a bit of money to play with.
And we want to grow as needed, not grow for the sake of growing, right? Like, we're going to grow in a way that's manageable and that we're actually adding value to students and student experience. We're not just going to grow just because we said we would.
That leads exactly into my next question. The Feds is rather big already. It's a pretty large organization. Are you concerned that the added amount of new people may create inefficiencies?
I don't think so. I think that the areas that we're looking at adding some student positions are areas that really don't have as many students and don't have as many staff. If you look at Luke's portfolio, really right now there's 2 part-time paid staff and they're students, and then they have a couple of volunteers under each of them, and that isn't really that many students when you think about the number of different advocacy priorities that are coming out of that portfolio and the amount of time the VP Education has to be out of the office. There's a lot of room there for significantly expanding our output without creating those inefficiencies.
And I think it comes back to this idea of, like, we need to trust our students with the things that they want to work on. It's not that they need to be coming back to the VP at every hour and be like, is this okay? Am I doing it right? It's a trust thing. It's like, these are their projects, these are their passions, so let them work on them. And yes, we're there for support, but I don't want to stand over someone's shoulder the whole way.
And then the other thing about growth is that, like, the university in general is just growing. So we're going to have more students be enrolled in university, and as a result, like, an organization that's representing students just needs to grow. So and I think the way we're doing that, like, by empowering students and bringing in more volunteers, just puts the power directly back with the students.
All right, that leads into my next question a bit. So this is something you said, Luke, at yesterday's debate. You said that you don't want the university to stop increasing enrollment. You want them to expand resources based on enrollment numbers. But in your platform, you mentioned that the university has a plan to increase enrollment by 5,000 over the next 5 years, and that you'll advocate for that number to decrease. So can you explain that a bit?
I think that we need to be reasonable to understand that the university has set goals, and they are growing right now based on the mechanisms in place at the provincial level that fund university. So in seeing this growth, and yes, we need to talk to the university about controlling the growth. What our team's really concerned about is that if the university is going to grow, it's growing and it's scaling up its resources as well. I don't want to see a drop in education for growth, and that's really the trade-off here. Is what we're concerned about is that the university, if it grows, it needs to grow its resources as well, so everyone gets a great education.
And I mean, and another thing to add into that is, like, as Luke said, like, the funding mechanisms at the provincial level really encourage rapid growth at universities right now. But, like, over the last year and continuing forward, they have been pushing this idea of strategic mandate agreements that each university is drafting, and maybe it has a different name now. But, like, this idea of universities identifying particular areas that they're going to specialize in. And it's slowly shifting in a direction where you can see that is going to start having an effect on the funding model beyond simply just number of students enrolled. And if that transition happens next year or within the next 2 years, like, feds can start prepping for that transition to happen and keep its eye on the provincial politics and how that's playing out. Because
I think it's just we just need to be, there needs to be undergraduate students at the table when these decisions are made, and I don't think we've done well in that in the past, and it's something that will affect every student here, growth. So we need to be on top of it, and we need to be working with the university to make sure that what we believe are the right decisions are made, so that every undergraduate student can have as best of experience as possible when they come to Waterloo.
Speaking kind of on the growth subject, your platform indicates that student space will not cost students anymore until it's able to be used. So
Okay.
how would you offset that cost?
So it's actually, like, it's almost always standard practice with universities, just when you're building. So if we were to get a new space acquired for student use, it's almost always standard practice. And the university is, generally speaking, as long as you bring it up. If you don't bring it up, they'll put it in. But if you bring it up, to not start charging students, if there's a fee associated with that new space, to start charging students that fee until they can access the space. So you can look at something like the health services reno that was done recently. The fee for that didn't actually get initiated until the renovations had finished and students were allowed to access the new portions of that building, even though we voted on allowing for that reno to happen a few years prior. So it's just making sure that when we have the discussions about getting more space on campus, if there is going to be a student fee associated to it, that we're making sure the agreements that we're signing and the agreements we're making before it goes to a referendum with students have kind of all of the boxes checked and all of, the books in order, so that students aren't paying fees unfairly, or, they're paying for things that they can use right away.
Just another quick question about student space. You did kind of mention this on Twitter, I believe, yesterday, but all of the candidates and all of the teams have mentioned accessing the new RIM buildings acquired for space, as they are this magical new area that we can just put everything in. Yeah. So have you done anything to see if feds will have access to that space?
Okay, so the thing with RIM buildings, we included it because it's potentially an option. Every discussion I've had with most university administrators currently, and like my space committees and stuff like that, because we haven't had an official meeting yet this term to get real answers, but side discussions have mostly implied that the RIM buildings are currently planned for grad and administrative offices, but that's only 4 of the 5 of them that I've heard so far. So one of them I haven't heard what the purpose is yet. So I've been trying to find that out, but it might, like, none of this is set in stone. They're thinking of making them predominantly grad and administrative offices, but it doesn't mean if we go and have a discussion and say, hey, we need student space, you guys just bought 5 new buildings from RIM. Obviously there's, a rollout of when we get access to them and stuff like that, but it's just making sure that we're not completely ignoring that option. The way things look right now, for us to get a RIM building might end up being a lot of effort. But until we actually sit down and have that formal discussion and that honest discussion on both sides, we don't know. So it's an option that exists. My side discussions seem to imply it's not likely going to be something that's given to students without significant effort from the student union. But who knows? Maybe they'll be friendly and let us have space without too much cost.
There is, of course, the concern that those are office buildings.
Yes.
Which can't necessarily be very easily
And that's
cheaply retooled.
Yeah, and that's the other thing, which is I think they're tailored to grad offices, administrative offices, because there is a great need on the university and there's a huge crunch for that. And maybe what it is when they move units there, where they moved people from becomes a space that students are allowed to take over. Or, it's what the RIM buildings does to the space dynamics on campus is interesting. And so as that's figured out, I think there's going to be a lot of different options that come up regarding what we can do to improve student space across campus. I still think a new building is a viable option, but it might not be the necessary one anymore, right? Because if enough places move into that building and it so happens that where they're leaving from ends up being a desirable space, then maybe it's just a matter of spending a much smaller fee to reno those spaces to be high quality instead of building a full-on new building. But it really comes down to like what spaces open up, what the quality of those spaces are, what's the cost incurred to make them a good space, and whether or not all of that balances out to being a better option than building a new building or not. And then asking students along the way to get that kind of continuous feedback. But we do have a fairly good amount of research into what students want out of a new space already. And I don't think it's invalid because it's only like a year and a half old now, right? So student opinion was mostly we want social and study space that's nice. So we want nice space.
And like part of the reason we're bringing all of this up, and I'm sure you guys can tell from our platforms, is that student space is something that we're really, really passionate about. And Jesse's probably the best person to work on this. Like he's the one with the most experience, and this is why this is like kind of his baby right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. I can talk lots about it, but
Yeah.
That brings up another question, I guess. Like, I know Andrew Noble really focused on student space as well. And so you talked about having students vote on student space options in February 2015, but you don't have that much time left of your executive year, and then what if the next exec doesn't wish to follow through, kind of like what happened to Andrew Noble?
that's why I want the referendum to happen. Because if the referendum passes, then if there is fees associated or anything with that, that's binding on the corporation, and it sets the train in motion, and it becomes very, very, very hard for it to stop. If Noble unfortunately the university wasn't at a place when the discussion started, having been at all of them with him, to be able to commit to a plan by the time February rolled around and it was realistic to roll out a referendum. It was discussed whether or not we should, but things weren't in place yet. Mm-hmm. And all of the work that was done that year isn't gone, it's just been sitting there. It's been paused, right? So it's not like we're starting from scratch next year. We just need to pick it back up and carry it the rest of the way. Mm-hmm. And getting to a decision by February should be fully doable. And as long as that vote happens, then it's put the train in start, and it's going down the tracks, and to stop it once a binding referendum on the corporation has happened would be immensely difficult.
It's also much more relevant now, especially when the university has released its enrollment numbers, and the fact that we are going to have another 4,000 undergraduate and another 1,000 grad students. So there's just more pressure for space because there's little space on campus now. The university is going to be one at the table, and they're going to want to work with us. And moving forward, that will definitely help these conversations and make them go faster.
Yeah, they've given us the numbers to apply better pressure to them. And they want more space on campus. They just want students to be involved in deciding it because they want to make sure if they go through the effort of building this new space, that it is something that students enjoy. Because frankly, from a marketing perspective, it looks really good on the university to say we just built all of this beautiful new space. It's happening at a whole bunch of universities around the country. And you can see the renderings coming out. Noble emails me all the time when something new and exciting pops up. And it's like, oh my God, it's so pretty. But it's it looks bad on the university to not be doing anything for student space, especially when you have studies coming out that show Waterloo is behind average on this. It's failing compared to other institutions on the amount of student space, the amount of study space, the amount of social space. Mm-hmm. And that's not what Waterloo wants. It wants to be known as a premier institution, right? And so you have to be the best at a lot of things to be considered premier. So
yeah, because the COU numbers show that over the last decade, we used to have way more than enough space per undergraduate student than we needed. I think we were at 105% or something, mm-hmm. And now we're much lower, and there is really a space crunch even now without adding more students. So it's something that the university is aware of, and that they're kind of behind the rest of Ontario, and they don't want to do that.
Yeah.
All right. Do you want to ask the last question?
We have a couple more, right?
Go for it.
We're running out of time. Okay. I have a question based off your Reddit AMA. You said that your platform is unique because you intend to empower societies and not baby them. How do you intend on empowering societies specifically?
So one of the things we really want to do is increase the relationships that Feds has with societies. So like there's a lot of strained relationships with some societies, and other societies, like with some of our meetings, a lot of things we've heard are like, we don't really know what Feds does, like, and how they're helping us out. We have like counselors, like Feds counselors, but then like there's not too much support that's provided. So things we want to do is basically help the societies set up their own services and events, and make sure that Feds is just acting again as a support system as opposed to like a mother or father figure, which is kind of what the relationship is like right now. So like there are a lot of societies that have progressed to a really strong point where like they can have their own services, they can hire their own staff, and we want to keep empowering them that way. And then there are other societies that like need that extra support from Feds. Like sometimes they need us to set up the collaborations between different faculties and things like that. So what we want to make sure we can actually do is work with societies so they can set up their own events, host their own services, and that way empower societies to be stronger, and then we're just there as a support system.
And I mean, in tandem to that is, like, the societies agreement doesn't expire next year, but it expires very shortly thereafter. So work on what the new agreement will look like can definitely begin next year. And as long as both parties are interested in signing a new agreement, you don't have to wait until it expires to sign a new one. And I mean, when we did meet with all the societies and stuff like that, like there was expressed interest in this idea of setting up a base agreement and looking into ways of how we can, in paper, set up this notion of increased freedom if you can prove that you've earned it, right? And so it's what that's going to end up looking like is going to be dependent on a ton of discussions with the societies. But with, like, we can look at the societies agreement specifically and how that's structured and what that formalized relationship is between Feds and each of the societies, and how we can restructure that formalized relationship to better fit in with this idea of collaborating instead of babying, right?
And even from like an education perspective, there's certain issues that are faculty specific. And in those cases, it shouldn't be the VP Ed of Feds kind of raining down and helping it. We need to support our societies and their VP Academics and VP Educations to kind of take those fights that they want, that are within their faculty. And it's a support thing, right? It's like, how can I help you? What can I do to help you? If that means that I need to go to meetings with them and they take the lead, absolutely. Or we just need to help them out with some research or whatever. And we would love to do that because, again, it's this trust of, this is your thing. How can we help you to be successful?
All right. Okay, so just one more question, and this one's for Jesse. Okay, you've received a lot of criticism over the deepness of your V-necks. Would you be willing to give them up if you're elected president?
You know, I think the notion of personal expression is something that Feds deeply values, right? It's ingrained in several of our policies, the freedom of speech, and as long as it's not infringing on other people's rights, Feds fully supports that. So I do deeply believe in my V-necks. And, you know, sometimes there's a time for them and there's times not for V-necks, and I get that. So it's understanding when it's appropriate to wear them, but I would not give up my V-necks. But I'll be careful of their use.
Well, that will
You
be
did
good
really
for
well to
them.
keep that with the straight face.
We lost him.
He's also not wearing one.
Yeah.
Well, I guess he is, but he's wearing a shirt underneath, so it's not all the time.
Well, it's not fully buttoned up, so it's kind of like a V.
All right.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.